You know, I've got a couple of concerns about my new Tesla, specifically electricity and charging, and it all has to do with thunderstorms. You know, we had a thunderstorm come through this morning, and I had the car sitting right over there, plugged in. It was charging. And I got to thinking, you know, this is electricity. We have a lot of lightning this morning, or we had a lot of lightning this morning, and a couple of things crossed my mind. You know, first of all, I had it plugged in, and it is wired, of course, to the fuse box, 220 volts, charging at 30 amps, in case you were wondering. Runs up, as you can see there, over the ceiling and then into the fuse panel. Now, there is no surge protection or anything that I'm aware of, unless it's built into this little box, which I assume is some sort of a transformer. I'm not exactly sure what the components of this are. I mean, I'm sure it's not just a pass-through, because if it was, there'd just be a plug running directly into the car, right? So I had it plugged in. Oh, and by the way, I'm pretty sure there's no surge protection or anything in the charging handle, although I'm really not sure. Now, as far as the car itself, is there a built-in surge protector in the car? I mean, let's say, for example, oh, and what happens if the power goes off? You know, the power goes out, obviously it's going to stop charging. I mean, that's a given, right? And then the power comes back on, and inevitably, when the power first kicks back in, there's a surge. Now, hopefully it's not enough to cause any kind of problems. You know, the last house that I lived in, it was an older, it wasn't old, it was a few years old, kind of farmhouse kind of thing. And the ladies that owned it before I did actually put a whole house surge protector in. And I got to thinking, you know, with all the electronics and things that we have these days, is that a good idea? I mean, I've got a, what, $40,000, $30-some thousand car alone sitting here that occasionally is connected to power. And if you go by what Tesla says, you should have this thing plugged in all the time. I mean, even now, while it's already 100% charged, it should still be plugged in if you follow their recommendations, I guess. So, the first concern, is a thunderstorm an issue when there's lightning and you could have a power outage for a surge, or even a surge through the electrical grid, if you will, from a lightning strike, let's say? And speaking of lightning strikes, let's talk about this. And I'm not really trying to be a conspiracy theorist or a fearmonger, but the Tesla, of course, is really a big electrical battery on wheels, right? I mean, underneath the whole part of the car here and all the way across to the other side is a big bank of batteries. So let's say you're driving down the road. Again, there's a big thunderstorm, right? Which we seem to be having a lot of this year. So there's a big thunderstorm. Are you more likely to take a strike because you're sitting on a battery? I don't know. I've never heard of anything happening like that. But of course, you see all the things out there about fires from the battery and all that stuff. I don't think that has anything to do with storms or electricity from the atmosphere. But nonetheless, while you're cruising around in a big electrical battery, does that draw electricity? Does that make any sense? And I'm curious if anybody out there has ever had any experience with this. You know, we've all probably seen the videos on YouTube where there's a big thunderstorm, somebody's on the freeway and they've got the dash cam running, and there's a truck or even a car in front of them, and it gets struck by lightning. Now that's just a regular vehicle, right? Doesn't have anything underneath it other than, I guess, the battery under the hood, but nothing else that's really electrical drawing lightning. Of course, it is metal, so I suppose one could argue that, well, you're sitting in a big metal box. Obviously, that's more of a target. When you're on a freeway that doesn't have taller things around it, it could draw more lightning. I don't know. Big question mark, I guess, for me, especially since I've never had an electric vehicle before. And the other thing I wonder about, is that covered under either warranty, which I'm sure it's not. That would be considered an act of God, if you will, or an act of nature, and that would not be covered under your warranty. But what about your vehicle insurance? You know, if you're driving around in an electric vehicle and something like that happens, is it going to be covered by your insurance? And speaking of storms and things, let's talk about water, because obviously when you get one of these big severe storms, there can be a deluge. You know, you can have tons of standing water all of a sudden, or even just driving down the freeway while there's water pooling on the road. Of course, once again, you're sitting on top of a big battery. And what happens when you get electric things wet? Well, they short out. So what about your insurance? Is that going to cover something like that? Let's say that you're on a side street and suddenly it's flooded, but not so flooded that it's obviously up to the door handles. I mean, you shouldn't drive through that anyway, right? But let's say that the water is, you know, kind of up to the bottom or lapping at the bottom of the car, which is right where the battery is. And for some reason it gets inside. Now, that would lead me back to warranty, right? Because if Tesla's producing a vehicle that should be able to be driven in any weather condition, I think, you know, normal weather, obviously you're not going to take this car and go driving through mud holes off-roading or something crazy, but just driving down a street when you get a storm, I mean, are you supposed to pull over, wait until all the water drains away, and then continue along with your trip? What about when you're charging at one of those charging stations? Let's say that you need to pull up to a supercharger and it happens to be a storm outside. I mean, you would think that a supercharger would be like a lightning magnet, right? But let's say you plug into one of those anyway, everything goes great. But while you're sitting there charging, lightning strikes one of those charging units. And has that ever happened? Again, I can't say, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever heard of it, but let's say that it does. Does that, and I'm sure it does, fall under the act of God, you know, stipulation or disclaimer in your insurance policy? And who's going to be responsible for it? Will it be the supercharger people? Would it be Tesla? Or would it just be you? And sorry, brother, but you had a bit of bad luck that day. Anyway, I was just thinking about this because it's my first experience with an EV. We had this big storm come through this morning while I happened to be charging, and I'm just curious. Leave a comment if you know, or if you've ever firsthand heard about anything happening due to storms or water with the Tesla, or any other EV for that matter. I'd be curious to know. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye.